Greetings everyone. Welcome to this introduction to the UK SORA safety methodology. My name is Annelise Calieres from the Drone Office. Today we will break down what UK SORA means for drone operators and UAS manufacturers, whether you fly commercially or are exploring beyond visual line of sight operations. This tutorial is designed for everyone, including those with little or no prior knowledge of the topic. Let's start with the big picture on the origin of UK SORA, safety in aviation, and the safety targets as part of UK SORA. Aerospace is regulated. We are part of the aviation sector, and we follow rules designed to protect all airspace users, whether they are flying drones or are on board helicopters or commercial planes or gliders. These rules were shaped internationally by ICAO, the UN agency, and at the national or regional level, aviation authorities are the airspace regulators. In the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority, or CAA, is the regulator. There are regulations addressing specifically drones or UAS operations in many countries, including the UK. In the UK, like in Europe, drone operations are classified into three categories based on risk. Open category is low risk on the left-hand side. You don't need to ask permission from the CAA before flying. On the right-hand side is the certified category, the highest risk type of operations, similar to manned aviation. It means that the requirements are similar to manned aviation in terms of certified operators, licensed pilots, type certificate for aircrafts, etc. And in the middle lies the specific category, which is increased risk from the open cat, but not just yet as risky as the certified category. In the specific category, operators must perform a risk assessment and they must get approval from the CAA. We'll focus on that specific category because SORA stands for Specific Operations Risk Assessment. SORA is a structured safety assessment methodology that helps operators demonstrate that their drone operations are safe. The UK SORA will enter into force on the 23rd of April 2025. On that date, UK SORA will become an accepted means of compliance proposed by the CAA so that drone operators can comply with the well-known Article 11 of regulation entitled Rules for Conducting an Operational Risk Assessment. The entry into force of UK SORA doesn't change anything in the open category. And, at least for now, it doesn't change anything on PDRA01. UK SORA is based on the safety framework developed by JARUS. JARUS brings together experts from more than 60 countries, including actually the UK CAA, but also EASA, FAA, and many other countries, as you can see on that map. A number of countries are currently following the current version of JARUS SORA, version 2.0. UK SORA is based on the latest version of JARUS SORA, version 2.5. Air transport is one of the safest modes of transport available to us. Over the years, the industry has reached pretty high levels of safety so that we all feel comfortable boarding a plane. In aviation, there are two main categories of risk, the air risk and the ground risk. The air risk is a risk of a fatality as a result of a mid-air collision between, let's say, a drone or UAS and another manned aircraft. The ground risk is a risk of fatality on the ground in case the UAS crashes. How do we express that risk? The maximum acceptable safety risk is often expressed as the maximum number of fatalities per flying hours. We look at how likely something bad is to happen and how bad it would be if it did. The harm considered under SORA is really the fatality risk in the air and or on the ground. SORA doesn't cover other risks such as privacy and environmental issues, for example, but different rules and regulations do apply to cover those. The target levels of safety, or TLOS, underpinning the SORA methodology are aligned with manned aviation. That means if we look at ground risk, actually at the very bottom, that the maximum number of fatality is 1 per million UAS flying hours. When it comes to the air risk in class A, B, or C, where you could encounter commercial aircraft, the maximum number of mid-air collision is 1 per billion flying hours. And for the other airspace volumes, the maximum number of mid-air collision is 1 per 10 million UAS flying hours. In part 1, we have covered aviation safety and the target levels of safety underpinning UK SORA. In this part 2, we will look into more details into UK SORA and provide you with first the big picture of how it works. At this stage, the key question is, how do you demonstrate that your UAS or drone operations meet the target levels of safety underpinning UK SORA? Enabling drone operators to meet those TLOS is actually the purpose of SORA. SORA gives a step-by-step method where you assess your ground risk, your air risk, you assess the quality of your risk mitigations so that you can determine your operation's final risk class. To counter your risk, SORA prescribes a level of assurance called Safety Assurance and Integrity Level, or SAIL. Low-risk operations need low assurance. High-risk operations need high assurance. And then for each SAIL level, SORA prescribes a set of 17 operational safety objectives, or OSO, that you must meet. In other words, for each class risk and SAIL level, meeting your OSOs and containment requirements at the right level of robustness means that you meet the TLOS. The SORA methodology provides a step-by-step approach that enables you to meet that TLOS. First, you quantify your ground risk, your air risk, you quantify the impact of the risk mitigations that you're going to apply so that you can determine your final risk class. SORA then prescribes a safety assurance and integrity level, or SAIL, to counter your final risk class. The lower the risk, the lower the assurance. The higher the risk, the higher the assurance required from you. Once you've determined your SAIL level, SORA will then prescribe a set of detailed operational safety objectives, or OSO, and containment requirements. And if you meet those OSOs and containment requirements at the right level of robustness, it means that you do meet the TLOS. Let's look at the SAIL table to make things a bit clearer. You assess your final ground risk from 1 to 10. You can see on the left-hand side. You assess your final air risk from A to D. You can see from left to right. In the table, you figure out what is your SAIL level. SAIL 1 and 2 is low risk. The maximum final ground risk is 3, and the ARC must be A or B. SAIL 3 and 4 are medium risk, and SAIL 5 and 6 are high risk. Now let's look at the OSO table. SORA defines 17 operational safety objectives, or OSOs. Your sail level dictates how robust each ozo needs to be. For example, at sail 2, 6 ozos are not required. 10 ozos are low robustness, and 1 ozo only is medium robustness, and that is the procedures, meaning the operations manual. But starting at sail 3, you can see that 10 out of the 17 ozos must be medium or high robustness. And you can also see that ozo number 5 about UAS design kicks in at sail 3. And that specific ozo requires input from the UAS manufacturer, which is not that easy to obtain. I've mentioned several times robustness, and you will hear that term on a regular basis, so let's explain it. Robustness is made up of two things. Integrity, it means how well the mitigation or the ozo reduces the risk when it works. It is the amount of safety gain expected. Then assurance. Assurance is how reliable that mitigation or ozo is. Is it really going to work when you actually need it? And will it deliver the total amount of safety gain that you expected? Generally speaking, when a ozo or risk mitigation must be met at low robustness level, it means self-declaration or ticks a box. But we'll see whether it will be that simple under UK SORA when we apply through the portal for the UK SORA application process. Medium robustness means that you must provide proof based on facts, evidence, data, or experience. And high robustness means that you must provide a validation by a third party. As a conclusion for this section, I mentioned the point already, but it's important to emphasize it. Meeting the ozos prescribed for sail 1 and 2 is relatively accessible. It's not required or low robustness except for the ops manual. But starting sail 3, it is becoming a bigger challenge. And therefore, for many operators, the initial objective should be to conduct operations under sail 2. And that means a final ground risk of maximum 3 and a residual air risk of ARC A or ARC B. And at the end of the day, it means that you need to try and demonstrate risk mitigations so that you do fit into sail 2. We are now in part 3, and we will drill more into the details of the UK SORA methodology. First, you assess your ground risk class. You need to determine the footprint on the ground that serves as the basis for determining your GRC. Then you will look at the population density within that area, and a SORA table will provide you with your intrinsic ground risk class. You then apply a set of prescribed ground risk mitigations so that you reduce that GRC, and you determine your final GRC. The ground risk footprint is made up of 3 parts: the flight volume, plus the contingency volume, plus the ground risk buffer. The flight volume is where your drone is supposed to fly. It is the intended area of operations. The contingency volume is a buffer to cope for abnormal situations like wind gusts. And the ground risk buffer is the area around the contingency volume in case of essentially a loss of control. In case of a loss of control, your drone should end up its flight within the ground risk buffer. As a rule of thumb, the CAA offers the 1-to-1 rule, meaning the height of the operational volume starting from the edge of the contingency area. So that area, flight volume plus contingency volume plus ground risk buffer, is the ground risk footprint that you must take into account for the next steps to determine your ground risk class. Since we are discussing ground risk, let's review the states of operations and the trigger for the contingency and emergency procedures. Under UK SORA, there are two states of operations: in control and loss of control. In control, most of the time you will be under normal operations, following your standard operating procedures. You will be flying your mission within the flight volume. But there may be some abnormal operations. For example, if you encounter navigation errors, or if your aircraft is drifting due to stronger winds. In that case, you may end up in a situation where your aircraft may exit the flight volume and enter the contingency volume. At that stage, the remote pilot must execute the contingency procedures so that the aircraft returns to the flight volume and the operation can be in a control state following standard operating procedures. Loss of control is when the remote pilot is unable to control the aircraft and/or the contingency procedures did not succeed. The aircraft is about to enter the ground risk buffer. It is about to exit the contingency volume, and at that stage the remote pilot must execute the emergency procedures in order to safely terminate the flight. We have determined the ground risk footprint. Let's now determine the intrinsic ground risk class of that footprint. The JARUS is assessed based on three criteria. Two criteria relate to the aircraft itself. It is its size in meters, from 0 actually to 40, and then it is its maximum speed, 25 to 200 measured in meter per second. It is important to note that this speed is not your cruising speed during the operation. It is the maximum manufacturer speed. The third criteria to determine the JARUS is the population density of that ground risk footprint. Please note that the population density is a maximum population density of your footprint, not the average. Let's take an example. If your aircraft size is maximum 1 meter, but its maximum manufacturer speed is, let's say, 30 meters per second, then you are under the second column due to the maximum speed. And if your operation is above a footprint where the maximum density is between 5 and 50,000 people per square meter, then you fall within the line heavily populated areas, and your intrinsic ground risk class is 7. A few more comments on the intrinsic ground risk class. If your UAS is less than 250 grams and your manufacturer's maximum speed is less than 25 meters per second, then your ground risk class is 1, regardless of the population density. So it's the harmless drone proviso. Another important point is that there is no mention to mass anymore in this table. The aircraft lethality is measured via size and speed. However, if your drone is less than 25 kilos, then there is an expectation that your aircraft cannot penetrate a standard dwelling. It cannot enter a house, essentially, and you will get a -1 ground risk mitigation as part of the M1A sheltering mitigation that we will cover later on. We've just seen that the intrinsic ground risk class depends on the maximum population density of the overflown area within the ground risk footprint. Now, where do you get that data? UK SORA provides a number of data sources, in particular the ONS or Copernicus at the European level. It also suggests some grid sizes for those maps. For example, if your operations maximum height is 500 feet or 152 meters, then the suggested optimal grid size is 200 meters times 200 meters. UK SORA provides for other sources of information, for example, survey data that you would have collected. It also mentions that if the population density values are not available or they seem inaccurate, then the drone operator, the applicant, can use qualitative descriptors for the intrinsic ground risk class, and those are provided within UK SORA. Let's have a look at a couple of examples in UK urban environment. The maps are sourced from the ONS, and hopefully the zooms are such that we match the requirement of a grid size of 200 by 200 meters. On the left-hand side is Winchester, and you can see that the light green shade is for a population density of less than 5,000 people per square kilometer. It means that within column 1, those areas would qualify as intrinsic ground risk class of 5. And then the following 2 darker green areas still cover areas with a population density of less than 50,000 people per square meter. It means that those areas would qualify for a IGRC of 6. On the right-hand side is Leeds with a similar zoom, so both maps are comparable, and you can derive the same conclusions. The light green areas would qualify in column 1 for intrinsic ground risk class of 5, and the rest would qualify for an IGRC of 6. We've determined the intrinsic ground risk class of our operations. We've seen in those couple of examples in an urban environment that their intrinsic GRC was, for example, 5 or 6. Remember that your final ground risk must be maximum 3 to fit into cell 2. SORA provides for a set of ground risk mitigations at various levels of robustness that can help you lower your ground risk. There are 4 types of mitigations. M1A, strategic mitigations for sheltering, meaning less people are exposed because they are under shelter. M1B, strategic mitigations, operational restrictions. These are mitigations that are under the control of the operator. M1C, tactical mitigations, ground observation. This is essentially flying velos and making sure that you have a visual analysis or understanding of the people at risk. And M2, effects of UA impact dynamics are reduced. I mean, this is essentially having a parachute or having a drone that is very frangible. Each of those 4 mitigations can be met at low, medium, or high level of robustness, and as your robustness level increases, so does the number of GRC reduction points. You want to use those risk mitigations because you want to reduce your cell meaning also reducing the cost of compliance of your operations. Low robustness risk mitigations for ground are relatively accessible. The first one is sheltering. We mentioned earlier that the use of a drone sub 25 kilos means that you should have access to that sheltering 1-point risk reduction. The second one is M1C ground observation. If you fly VLOS or if you fly BVLOS with visual mitigation, then you also benefit from this additional point. Beyond those 2 points, things might be a bit more complicated. You can either demonstrate at a medium level of robustness, M1A or M1B. It is either or, you cannot cumulate both. The other option is to demonstrate M2, effects of UA impact dynamics are reduced. In other words, you can use an aircraft equipped with a parachute. And finally, the other option to demonstrate ground risk reduction is to make a safety argument. And that argument may not be necessarily written in black and white in UK SORA, but the CAA should accept and probably will accept safety arguments as long as you can demonstrate the safety gain. Now let's look at the air risk class, or ARC. The process is similar to the ground risk. That is, first you determine the volume of airspace considered for your ARC. You determine your intrinsic air risk class. You apply risk mitigations, and then you determine your final residual air risk class. The reference airspace volume for the ARC is the operational volume, and that is your flight volume plus the contingency volume around it. You must then determine the intrinsic air risk class of that airspace volume. The ARC is a qualitative classification of the rate at which a UAS or drone would typically encounter a manned aircraft within that volume of airspace. There are 4 levels of air risk class, from A to D, from minimal risk to high risks. The UK SORA is different from JARUS SORA when it comes to that air risk flowchart. UK SORA also takes into account 2 different types of encounters in the airspace, and those types of encounters dictate the ARC level. Type 1 is an operation primarily conducted under self-separation and see and avoid, so let's call it in uncontrolled airspace, and that would dictate more or less an ARC C level unless proven otherwise. For example, that would be in uncontrolled airspace class G. Type 2 encounter are operations that occur in separation provided by an ANSP, so let's call it controlled airspace, where there could be an encounter with commercial air transport, and that dictates an ARC D unless proven otherwise. So where can you fly in the UK, and in particular, where can you fly BVLOS in the UK for now? And this is our humble understanding. We might be proven wrong, and if so, just reach out to us to correct our understanding. The first point we need to make is that if your operations are VLOS, then you get a -1 ARC class reduction to minimum ARC B, not ARC A. For example, if you fly in class G airspace, uncontrolled airspace, it is ARC C, but if you fly VLOS or BVLOS with visual mitigations, then you have a -1 and you are in ARC B. Otherwise, you can also fly on the top of the chart in ARC A, being atypical air environment. There is another cell that is in ARC B, on the right-hand side. However, at this stage, it's unclear to us which proportion of airspace would fit into that category at the end of this little chain of yes or no's. And the wording within UK SORA may indicate that known traffic environment may be required anyway. So for now, our understanding is that in the UK, BVLOS for most operators would be in atypical air environment or BVLOS with visual observers. You have determined your intrinsic ground risk, applied some mitigations that resulted in a final ground risk. You have determined your arc risk, possibly identified some strategic mitigation so that you understood what is your residual arc risk. That table helps you determine your final cell level from 1 to 6. Containment requirements are part of JARUS SORA. They are in UK SORA, and they are something new for the UK market. The containment requirements aims at dealing with flyaways and what if the drone flies away and exits the ground risk buffer area. The process to determine the containment requirements is relatively similar to the ground and air risk. You determine the adjacent area, then you determine that area's average population density and the existence of assemblies of people within that area. And then you determine the robustness level of containment requirements, low, medium, and high, based on those people at risk density qualifications. The size of the adjacent area is pretty much 3 minutes flight at maximum speed with a minimum of 5 kilometers and a max of 35 kilometers. The level of robustness of your containment requirements depends on 3 criteria. The average, not maximum, average population density within the adjacent area, the existence of assemblies of people within 1 kilometer of the operational volume, and then your cell, because if you have a high cell, then your UAS operations are already pretty safe, so your containment requirements that come on top of cell requirements are low, whereas if you have a low cell operation, your assurance is lower, therefore your containment requirements are high. So you can see that if on the right hand side your average population density in the adjacent area is less than 50,000 people per square meter, if your assemblies of people, if any, is lower than 40,000 people per square meter, and if your operation is cell 1 or 2, then your containment requirement is low. It's important to note that there must be a containment requirement. Not required doesn't exist in that table. All drone operations in the specific category under UK SORA must meet at least low robustness containment. How can we achieve this? At this stage, we actually are not so sure about it, so very humbly, we have provided on the left-hand side the integrity details with regards to low containment in UK SORA, and let's see whether emergency procedures, system redundancies description by the drone operators, training, etc., will be sufficient to meet low robustness requirements for containment, or if the UK CAA will require, in some or all cases, a flight termination system. We covered the OSOs, the operational safety objectives, in part 2, but let's remind everyone again in this part 3 that once you have determined your cell, you must meet each OSO, the 17 OSO in that table, at the level of robustness prescribed by your sale level. The final step is to document your comprehensive safety portfolio, and that would include the risk mitigations, the OZOs at the right level of robustness, and the containment requirements also at the right level of robustness. In summary, UK SORA is a safety methodology that helps you meet the target levels of safety TLOS aligned with manned aviation. In the process, you determine your risk class. The methodology then prescribes a safety assurance level or SAIL to counter that level of risk. To deliver that assurance, SORA prescribes a set of detailed operational safety objectives like training, procedures, UAS design, etc., as well as containment requirements. If you meet those detailed OZOs and containment requirements at the right level of robustness, then you meet the target level of safety. Thank you for listening to this high-level introduction to UK SORA. I hope this helped demystify the process and show you what is achievable and what is the right approach. If you have any questions or if you want to explore how this would apply to your operations, feel free to reach out to us at the Drone Office. Thank you.